Okay, this is the first screencast for chapters 7, 8, and 9. And that little bird there is a white-breasted nuthatch. You may know that from, it's kind of like going upside down as it goes up and down your trees. Pretty much going down, but it kind of faces, again, upside down. Just a fun little tidbit. And these 2 or 3 chapters are on population and community ecology. And eventually it bridges into human population. So what is a biological community? It is all the things that happen to live in a particular location and how they kind of get along with each other. This here is just kind of looking at how it can vary from a location that doesn't have a whole lot of biodiversity into the amount of niches that you can have in an area which is much more biodiverse. So as far as the structure and the locations of these, you can see on here a niche structure is the potential of how many different species and occupations, if you will, these things can have in a particular location. So remember, a niche is something's role in a community. And you can see on here a geographic location is looking at the species diversity as far as location on the globe. And as you go more towards the equator, you're always going to have more biodiversity. Now, of course, if you're in the desert region at the 30 and 30 north and south, that is going to be less. But generally speaking, going towards the equator, you're going to have more biodiversity because you have more niches as a result of that. As you go towards up into Canada and further north or further south towards the poles, it's going to decrease considerably. So this is just different ways of categorizing species. There's a couple different ways you can do it, but these are just a couple examples. Native, non-native, indicator. We'll go through these as we're kind of going through the presentation. Native, just to kind of look at the one they're pointing out here, is something that is naturally found in a particular location. So it's always kind of been there. Non-native does not necessarily mean that it does harm. It just means it's not originally from that location. So it can move around from different location, but it doesn't necessarily mean it does harm, but it's there. So we can look at, for example, the salmon that we are raising in our classroom and are found in the Great Lakes. Those are non-native to Michigan, but they're not considered invasive. So looking at as far as potential problems in an ecosystem, there's a variety of things we can look for, but there's some species that are usually kind of like the warning signs that there could be potential problems. But you can see on here that these are some causes of some problems, and then there's some things that we actually see. Let's take a look. Indicator species. Many times, an indicator species is going to be an amphibian, at least in locations that have a lot of water or vernal ponds. The reason for that is because they do so much through their skin and they have different life cycles that they are not protected. So an example I use for this is comparatively is, as you can see here, frogs or any type of amphibian. They do a lot of their metamorphosis, their changes outside of the womb, if you do make that comparison to humans. We go through lots and lots of changes, but we have a lot of protection as you're growing inside the womb. Amphibians, they're doing all this out in the open, right? Exposed to all things in the environment. If there is potential for pollution in the air or the water, they're exposed to it, and all those things are going to affect how well they do. And many times when you see that or understand or see that there's going to be potential problems in a community, an environment, is because of what we see going on with amphibians. They are the signal that something is not right. And these are some examples of some potential problems in an environment. You may hear my dogs barking in the background. It's just because something moved outside. All these are potential problems that you can have in a community. And we've talked about some of these already, and you have talked about some of these in some presentations we've done in class. But you can see that all of these things are conditions that are out there and making matters difficult for some species, again, more than others. Keystone species. I don't know if we have talked about this at all in our particular class, but keystone species are looking at certain ones. Usually they're the top of the food chain, but they don't necessarily have to be. But keystone species are ones that have the greatest impact and kind of regulate everybody else within the community. For example, wolves in Yellowstone is the classic example we like to look at. When the wolves were removed from Yellowstone through hunting, it drastically changed all the other species that are present in the community. The elk, well, there's a long story. I don't have time to go over the whole thing, but when they returned the wolves back to Yellowstone, it very much brought the entire ecosystem back into check. And they affect everybody from the smallest species that they really don't interact with to the largest species, including bears, that of course they don't have a direct impact on. Another one, which is a classic comparison, are sea otters. So this is another one. Those two are the ones that College Board likes to refer to the most. Sea otters eat sea urchins, and sea urchins eat sea kelp. And if the sea otters are not present, the sea urchins, their populations will explode, and they will eat the sea kelp, which is like a plant-ish species in aquatic seawater. And the fact that they can remove that can drastically change the biodiversity and a variety of other chemical conditions in water. So sea urchins are very, very important to have in an ecosystem. Foundation species. This kind of sounds like something we mentioned in the last couple of chapters, 5 and 6, about the founder effect. This is not necessarily that. These are species that kind of create the environment for everybody else in an area. Think beavers that dam up a river and create more like a pond or a lake. They establish an ecosystem. So when they show up, they start changing it, and other species adapt or prefer the conditions that the beavers create in that particular location. The one we're looking at here is elephants. They do it as well because they'll open up a location. They'll broaden out an ecosystem, so they change it fundamentally for everybody else. We talked about this before, but we're just going to show it here as far as how species minimize their direct head-to-head competition, resource partitioning, Gauss principle. And again, the idea is that they will split up resources to avoid this head-to-head competition. And this isn't something that just happens like in a generation. They've already gone through this over multiple generations, and it's just who they are. And we just look at it in almost like a snapshot type image, but it's kind of always who they've been because of these changes over a long period of time. These are some strategies that species will take on to protect themselves. It's really quite interesting, and you kind of going through there. I'm not going to hit on all of these, but they can do various things to blend into their environment. They can do a couple things to protect themselves. One of my favorite ones, which is not on this list, are skunks. Skunks are black and white, and they roam around, of course, the forest. They are not hiding from anybody. They are in very bright, not bright, but obvious in an ecosystem in the forest. And they're letting everybody know who they are. And everybody pretty much knows, don't mess with the skunks. Bears, they will avoid skunks, even though, of course, bears are much stronger and larger. They know what happens if you get too close or bother skunks. It ruins your whole day. There are certain types of butterflies, focusing on this one over here. Monarch butterflies, they are poisonous. So species know not to eat them. Birds know not to eat them if they don't want to get sick. You don't want to kill the bird because then there's no learning taking place. But birds will only eat so many monarch butterflies and then realize this was a really bad idea. But what's interesting is other butterflies will blend in or mimic monarch butterflies, like this one in F. They will look like monarch butterflies, and then they gain that advantage of not being poisonous, but that same protection that is afforded to monarch butterflies. It's kind of interesting. And again, this isn't a decision that's made in any immediate time. It just so happens to work out that the species that looked most like monarch butterflies had that same benefit. All right, this is a pretty good place to pause, and we'll come on with the next presentation afterwards.